listening to Superpower Creatives on the Superpower Up podcast. The show that sparks the superpowers of musicians and artists to ignite change.
All the little men, will they get the chance to come back?
Hello, welcome. This is David Delmar, your host of Superpower Creatives. And you're listening to our episode, Philosophy, Consciousness, and the Economy. I believe everyone is a creator, and it's this inherent birthright that's the source of our superpowers. Stepping into this personal authority is scary, though. This show celebrates creatives that stay true to who they really are, making a living using their creative superpowers. The stories they share will excite and inspire listeners to do the same, making positive change in the world. Jim Mosquera is a published author of fiction and nonfiction and a business professional who helps to make sense of the complicated as he adds color to discussions pertaining to our economy and the markets. He wants people to understand the world around them and to think for themselves. This mission began in his collegiate days as he wrote his master's thesis that focused on operations research and computer simulation, which helped him to parlay that education into a career where he pulled off the seemingly impossible, becoming successful in business during the stock market crash of 1987. That's a pretty good trick. His creation, the Sentinel Report, served him as a muse, resulting in his written creation of 3 books, helping people understand and navigate the market and our economy. Subsequently, those publications themselves served as a muse for Jim's realistic fiction novel titled 2020 that he published in 2016. The story is a political thriller with financial crisis, cyber terror, and alternative parties challenging the two-party status quo, culminating in the presidential election of 2020. Next in the series is Rebellion. It continues where 2020 left off. In this one, the country reacts to the president's historical decision, and another main character makes a chilling discovery that will shake the nation. The latest book, Division, tells us a story about navigating an existential crisis for the United States. Those sound super good. I feel very anticipatory and enthusiastic to introduce our guest for today's show. He's a really smart guy who knows a thing or two about using creativity, whether it be for his trilogy books or global financial market analysis. So let's welcome Jim. Hi, Jim. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, Dave. Great to be on with you.
Awesome. Hey, Jim, I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your last name correct. I forgot to ask you before the show. Can you tell us what how your last name is pronounced?
Yes, Mosquera.
Mosquera. I thought so, and I was going to ask it, then we got started. I'm like, well, we'll just let everybody kind of make sure they know it the right way too. So, so thanks for that, Jim. And also thanks for helping the layman to know what the economy really is and how it actually operates. I mean, I feel like all of us are pretty well served anytime we're able to increase our understanding and awareness about this kind of a topic that is so important, but yet we don't, most of us know too much about it. Today we're talking about our show, Philosophy, Consciousness, and the Economy. And more specifically, what Jim thinks is the philosophy consciousness of our economy. And do the decision makers have a philosophy consciousness of any kind? So, Jim, how we like to start our show off is with possibly the obvious question, and this is it. What is your creative superpower?
Well, in the intro, you mentioned that I have a background in engineering. I actually have 2 degrees in engineering and did my master's thesis, as you mentioned. It was basically focused on a branch of industrial engineering called operations research, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying we use math to solve business problems. And after that, I went into a career primarily in the telecommunications and technology field. But kind of parallel to my career, I had always had a very latent interest in things related to money. And, you know, when you start talking about money, then you start getting into things that are economic, financial, and so forth. So that kind of spurred more and more interest. And I guess if I had to define my superpower is using the objectivity and the analytical skills that are garnered as an engineer and then in my subsequent career to really distill down to some of the more fundamental building blocks, if you will, of what an economy really is And really more importantly, perhaps, and for your listeners or other people that might listen to this podcast, is how those things affect our political climate. And I don't think you would have anybody argue that the last, certainly handful of years have gotten very, very political, especially in the United States, but not just the United States, but all over the world. So a theme of mine that I talk about in my nonfiction books is that intersection of politics and economics. So really my superpower, if you will, is trying to blend those two things together to help people understand what's going on, not just in the economy, but in politics as well, because they have very, very much a strong interaction.
I mean, and that is a superpower for sure, because there's so much confusion between those two. I mean, speaking personally for myself, I mean, I look at the economy and I look at politics, and they're so obviously closely related, but yet at the same time, they would have you kind of think that they're kind of two distinct, separate things. And us people who just are kind of taking what we're given, we're just taking what we're given. We don't even know what it is. We're confused, but like we kind of act like we know, but we really have no clue. And that is a superpower to be able to be able to help that sort of confused state of understanding when it comes to politics and our economy. And I want to ask you this about that, Jim. So what is it? What's your why? I guess for how for how you approach your books, how you approach your creativity. What's your big why as far as how you take that superpower and you put that into the world where other people can benefit from it?
Well, I'd like to think there's some altruistic intentions here on my part, and that's part of it. And part of it, honestly, is to kind of teach and help people understand. Because, and again, I'll draw back on my background as an engineer, which is, again, those are my degrees, and my general personality, which tends to be analytical. So we try to solve problems, and so if I see a problem, we try to use our analytical skills to try to solve them. And I don't do it with any sort. And if anybody reads my nonfiction books, you'll see that they're very apolitical. They don't lean one way or the other. They're really all about solving problems. And I think I know what happens is, as problems tend to worsen, then you get more and more of this polarity in society, which you clearly see it today. And some of the things that I think are very, very important that people really need to pay attention to today were really not, because of the political climate. And when those things then begin to unravel, what we face as a nation is, a very, very, tumultuous period, more tumultuous than we've had in the last couple of years, that we need to really be able to know how to handle it and how to come out on the other side of the crisis. Because, I mean, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just that we need to figure out and prepare ourselves on how to navigate through it.
Wow. I mean, that's awesome stuff. And it's obviously so salient to just these tumultuous times that as a world we find ourselves in. This is really awesome stuff, Jim. We need to take a quick break, and because I'd love to expand a bit further on some of the things that you're sharing, the principles of what you're sharing, and how it can help to increase the awareness of people that are listening. But before we do jump into a break, let's tell people where they can find out more about you, Jim.
Probably the best place, I would say, Dave, is to go to my author website, which is jimmosquera.com. So that's JIMMOSQUERA.com. Outstanding.
That's perfect. All right. So we've been talking with Jim Mosquera today about philosophy, consciousness, and the economy. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue on this interesting journey with Jim and how you out there listening can start implementing what he's sharing to improve your bottom line and improve your life.
Are you here to change the world? Do you talk about things like vibration, frequency, awakening, and consciousness? Are you pretty sure you have superpowers? The Superpower Net is unlike normal coaching programs and conscious communities. We provide training, intuitive guidance, peer-to-peer learning, intensive one-on-one coaching, and a high vibrational network of people just like you. When you join the net, you get 24/7 access to a collaborative group of people who support you as you master your personal power and unlock your superpowers. If you're ready to use your superpowers to change the world, then join the Superpower Net today. Visit superpowerexperts.com/the-net to learn more.
We're back. You're listening to Superpower Creatives. And today we're talking with Jim Mosquera on our episode, Philosophy, Consciousness, and the Economy. So, Jim, I'd love to circle back to where we just left off before the break. And I'd like to start with just kind of expanding on what you were saying with how it is that people will be able to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, even though right now we are kind of in an interesting forecast as it goes with the weather of, and the ultimate forecast of what it looks like moving forward with politics and our economy. Tell us a little bit more about how you see that light in the tunnel, where we're at, where that light might be, and what we could possibly expect in the in-between those two places.
Well, I think sometimes to figure out where we're going, we need to kind of know where we've been and, how was our journey here to this point. And we can mark a couple of different points in time. One was right after World War II, when let's just call it the monetary order for the world. How money was going to work in the entire world. That was established first right after World War II, and that kind of continued on for a period of, I guess, 26 years until 1971. And in my books, one of the things I mention is that we should really remember Richard Nixon, not so much for Watergate, which obviously was very impactful, but I think there was something that he did during his presidency that was far more impactful than that and had far-reaching consequences, and that's something he did in 1971, which kind of undid what was done in 1945. Well, since 1971, we've had a different period of time in our economy where, debt's grown significantly, and we've had let's call it we've had one crisis, I guess, if you want to call it, probably like late 1979, early 80, 81, in that time frame. You had another one that occurred in the late 90s, didn't hit the United States as much. Then we had the dot-com bubble right around 2000. We had the financial crisis in 2008. And right after 2008, we had the birth of two very, very important, I'll just call them mini movements in the United States. The first was the Tea Party, which happened in spring of 2009. And then you had Occupy, fill in the blank, because you had different Occupy movements. And those movements were very important because they sort of set the political tone of those groups that were, let's just call them, they were going to be pushing back against the established political order. And I would say that continued on well into the election of 2008. And then it continued on certainly into the election of 2016. And one of the things I point out is that in the 2016 election, I really was honestly not the least bit surprised that some of the people that you saw in very prominent roles in that election, candidacy-wise, were people that, a few years before you never would have expected. And let me give you the names. The first one was Dr. Ben Carson, who was actually an early leader in the Republican primaries, and this is a guy that, doesn't have any political background. The second person is the current president of the United States, which, again, has no real political allegiance. And the third candidate, honestly, was Bernie Sanders, who really is not a member of the Democratic Party, technically is an independent, but calls himself a democratic socialist. And I will put this idea out to your listeners. Yeah. Had the DNC shenanigans not occurred in 2016, you very well may have seen a 2016 election that had Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump. Now, I'll leave it to speculation as to who would have won that election. But my point is that the reason you had candidates like that appearing in 2016, and you had a candidate from what I'll call the old political order, Secretary Clinton, you're really seeing a sea change here in the political attitudes of Americans. And don't forget, that was largely a result of what happened in the financial crisis in 2008. And so now what you're seeing is the continuation of that, more polarity in society. And yet at the same time, you've got these statistical economic measures that say, okay, we're doing good here, here, here. But we also know that a lot of Main Street, in the business that I'm in, because I help small businesses with financing, I know a lot of small businesses and individuals that are struggling significantly financially. And remember, this is with stock markets near highs, interest rates still relatively low, unemployment. Yeah. I mean, so when you look at some of those statistics, well, what happens when the next recession comes, which I forecast is not terribly far away? You're gonna enter a period of even greater political, let's use revolution if you want to use that term. And my prediction for you, and this is kind of looking ahead, reading the tea leaves, is that in the next presidential election in 2020, which again coincidentally happens to be the title of one of my fictional books, you're gonna see, some different political ideologies probably brought even further to the fore. And one of those, honestly, is what you saw being espoused by Bernie Sanders. And you have a lot of the younger generation that that supports that sort of democratic socialism. And let me clarify: I don't mean that these candidates are going to emulate somebody that would run Cuba or Venezuela. It's really more something that you would see on the European continent. And so what you're going to see is you're going to hear more of that word progressivism, democratic socialism, and there's a strong chance that the next Democratic nominee will have those characteristics about him or her. Or what you'll see further fracturing within each of the parties, both the Republican and the Democratic side, that you'll actually potentially see split-offs from that, and you could see what I'll call more legitimate third-party candidates, a la what you saw in 1992 with Ross Perot. It's these candidates that will actually, potentially gain a lot of votes. You could see some new political parties sprout out in 2020 or maybe 2022, perhaps 2024. You're going to see some sea change there. And then if we do have a significant recession between now and 2020, the incumbent party will probably lose office. You'll get these new ideas, and it'll set forth another financial type crisis in the years, let's say from 2020 to 2024, that then, it'll cause a significant shock in this country. And then you'll see probably a new sort of financial order, kind of like what we saw at the end of World War II in 1945, come to the fore. And then think of it as a big reset, if you will, that will occur at that point. Again, this is not an apocalyptic vision, but, there's going to be some significant challenges to go through.
Yeah. And it's just, I hear that and it makes a lot of sense just based on evolution and how things sort of repeat themselves. But when I hear that, I think about like the people of particularly of the United States, and when they are maybe in a denial state of what a recession would be like again, where do you feel like we are as a nation and as a people in terms of our unity? Are we united, and like the media is just trying to say we're divided, and they use things like the economy to sort of make that seem real? Or do you think there's some real division in the country right now, that almost like something of a recession is what would be necessary to sort of bring people back together to realize, hey, you know what, we're all kind of in this together? I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because oftentimes it's crises that tend to bring people together. One of the things I talked about in my nonfiction books is what we need to do societally to kind of forge those bonds again. Because again, we do have a lot of divisions. We have divisions now even within families because due to politics.
Yes.
People can't have those discussions around the dinner table. I've heard so many anecdotes about, parents disowning children, the kind of talking, politics-free zones at the Thanksgiving table and so forth. And, so it is a significant problem. But I think as we move forward and we go through the next crisis, people will probably have to look towards smaller community, let's say, orders or levels and establishments. And what I mean by that is that rather than when you get through the ultimate crisis looking to Washington, D.C. to resolve problems for you, you're probably going to have to do that at a smaller community level, whether it's at the state, city, local, township, whatever the division is. It needs to be at a tighter focus, because that's really where a lot of the community bonds will get reformed, and then you can build anew from there. And we know from, and I mentioned this in my last nonfiction book, Escaping Oz and Observer's Reflections, that they talk about how soldiers, when they've been off in conflicts in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and so forth, when they come back to civil society, they struggle. They talked about how people that survived the London bombing raids of World War II, that they felt that kinship or esprit de corps being in the tube or the subway, huddled up there, because they had a single unifying thing that brought them together. Same with soldiers, they miss that camaraderie and esprit de corps, and then they come back into civil society, and they have mental issues as a result of that. And so that's what we're experiencing now. But when we have that single common bond, if you will, of something that is our foe, and in the future that'll be some sort of economic foe that we'll face, we'll have to rally around that. But the formation of those bonds has to occur at small levels first, and then it has to kind of grow from there. Yeah,
I love that. And I mean, what I hear in that, Jim, is that it's going to be like the people within your own community. You have to find post the next big recession, you have to find that commonality together in your communities. And it's not so much the big G, big government anymore, but it's more localized, communities of strength that are defining and putting new pillars of foundation to sort of build on. And what I'm hearing, and let me know if I'm off base, but it sounds like that our government as we know it within the next 5-6 years is going to look a lot different than it does today. Is that kind of what you're saying a little bit? You think is going to sort of be the reality to come here in the next 5-6 years?
Well, here's what I do know. Right now, we're in, and I mentioned statistically, there's a lot of strong economic measures that are posted.
Yeah.
We're the first fiscal year of the Trump administration. Again, I'm not picking on the Trump administration. I'm just saying whoever's in office.
Yeah.
We're looking at a $1 trillion deficit now. Okay. And we also know, what's happening with the entitlement programs in this country. We also know that the Congressional Budget Office has forecast, I think it was $10+ trillion added to the national debt in the next 10 years. And again, that's assuming, everything's roses, everything's, balloons and popsicles, whatever.
Yeah.
All
those tasty treats.
Yeah, exactly. It's like cotton candy or whatever. And that's that assumption. That's assuming, no sort of, financial setback and so forth. So yeah, the country's going to face, some economic pressures as a result of that. It's going to face economic pressures due to rising interest rates. And, geopolitically, the United States has been able to, wield the big stick around the world because the United States dollar is the dominant currency. Well, other countries take note of that over the course of time, and they try to figure out, okay, well, how do we get out from under the dollar's thumb, And those things are in the works right now in terms of how countries trade back and forth with one another. And again, it's not anything that's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
But, back to the financial order will change over the course of time, and the United States will be affected by that change. So, yeah, there will be some significant changes that I think you'll see in government. I'm not predicting that the United States government's going to go away. That's not what I mean at all.
Yeah.
But I think you can anticipate some significant changes, and that's part of that crisis that I talk about. And it's important to understand what this next crisis will look like, how do we get through it, and how do we come out on the other side.
I love that. It's first, it's just great to get that sort of, to hear it from somebody like you. It makes it something that we can accept as a strong potentiality, and that hearing it on the early onset to it is from someone, as highly reputable as yourself. It's kind of almost like, hey, here's what you can expect. So just start planting that in your subconscious to start getting prepared for this kind of stuff, whatever that needs to look like for you. I've got this question for you, Jim. We're talking about philosophy consciousness today, and there's so much that seems to go into every decision that gets made by the governments, by legislator, by all the people that make the rules. What do you feel like is the philosophy consciousness today? Or is there one? What's the intention behind the rules, how they are now, and as we move forward into this new look, post what you've been sharing today, as far as after the crisis, how do you feel like that philosophy consciousness can be something where it is defined and it gives people a say as far as how things are done, not so much where it's they're told how it's done? I'm curious to what you think about as far as that philosophy consciousness pre and post this ultimate recession that's going to hit within the next 6 years.
The philosophy consciousness, I guess, and as I understand you define it, I try to capture a lot of that in my last nonfiction book, Escaping Oz: An Observer's Reflections. And what I did there is to try to define for people, what we as a society have asked for. And you talked about, what legislators do in government and so forth. But really, those things are a reflection of the desires, if you will, and wants and asks of the voting public.
Yeah.
We I think as a voting bloc, we forget the power that individual voters have. And I know many people think, okay, well, my vote individually doesn't matter in an election. And while statistically that may be true, as a large voting bloc, it is still absolutely essential that, we make our needs and wants known. The problem that we have is the way our economic system is set up, it's easy for people to raise their hand. And again, this is across all economic strata and say, okay, I want this, I want this, I want this. And a politician, for the most part, right, is very eager to oblige and say, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, however, the downstream consequences of what people are asking for and then what government does and legislates they're not well understood. And so you have things that occur later that nobody really thought about. And one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason why politicians can continue to basically do more and more and more is because our monetary system, our economic system allows them to do so. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion debts like it's, we're just driving down to the gas station to fill up, flip our tank. I mean,
that's what's weird about it.
It just rolls off the tongue, right? And even though, even those are staggering amounts of money, what you have to consider is why it's so easy for that to happen. I mean,
yes.
in the last budget set that got set here, both the Republicans and the Democrats, they got kind of criticized by members of the opposite party and their own party. And my point is that there's no friction to anything that they did. Here's a statistic that you can take away from this conversation. In the last budget that we just did, the Defense Department's budget went up by the equivalent of what the Russian defense budget is in a single year. So our budget went up by the rough equivalent of what their budget is in 1 year. Okay. And again, I'm not picking necessarily on defense budget, but I'm just saying that's a large amount of money, right? And there is no friction that's there because everybody's confident, we can keep spending our way into more and more debt. At the point where that no longer becomes possible, this order that we've had set up in this country, certainly since 1945, will come to an end. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to get through this next period because it's going to be a sea change for how individuals and legislators think.
It's so interesting to hear that because obviously in this last political election, the storyline of, Russia and its involvement with our elections and Trump and all this sort of thing. I'm wondering what you think of this notion that Russia and the other nations of the world are just waiting for the United States to fall on their own sword with this spending and this these entitlements and just sort of how we have become a divided nation. I was curious what your thoughts are with just that premise that they're just kind of waiting for us to self-destruct or fall on our own sword because we don't know any better.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things I'd like to point out is that I criticize, how our monetary system is, but the rest of the world's monetary system is really not much different. It's all based on the same type of monetary system. We have a distinct advantage over every other country in the world because, again, what I said happened in 1945 set up the U.S. dollar as being the king of all monetary authority. What I was pointing out earlier is that when the U.S. wields that dollar as a hammer for as far as making geopolitical decisions or sanctions and so forth, those sanctions are made possible because of the dollar. Well, other countries, they catch on to that. They're not dumb, and they're going to try to figure out, okay, well, how do I circumvent that in the future? And those things are taking place today, and that'll be part of what happens in the future. So one of the things that you can look at in terms of the United States is it's an empire, right? And I use empire in a different word, in a different way, if you will, than maybe you've read about in your history books. But we have our tentacles in many, many parts of the world, not just even physically, geographically, but also economically. Empires come under a lot of stress, and in the last book, I kind of show what some of the stress patterns are. Stressors, if you will, that empires face and how they start to fade away. Again, doesn't mean that the country goes away because the British had, a big empire, Great Britain didn't go away. And that's not what I'm saying. It's just that the influence of that empire and the way that empire looks will change over time.
Wow. I mean, I feel like this discussion is just getting started. I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever. It's, especially when, the opportunity to speak with somebody like yourself is available to Yeah, it's enticing. Well, this has been so awesome, Jim, and just thanks for sharing all this wisdom today. I know that the listeners and myself will benefit from just having a perspective from somebody like yourself to help us to just have a greater awareness about what we're doing. But before we close out the show, let's remind listeners where they can go to find out more about you, Jim.
Yeah, I have a series of books, both on the nonfiction side, as we talked about mostly on this show, and the fictional side basically sort of encapsulates some of the things that we've been talking about, puts a story around it and puts some characters around it and some events where people can be entertained, certainly, but at the same time, you're kind of learning and, kind of questioning. Some people have asked me, wow, after reading your first book, I'm beginning to think maybe that's not even so much fiction, that, that could actually be nonfiction. But so my website will have, all of my books, fiction and nonfiction. I also have recorded the entire fictional series and one of my nonfiction books. So for those that would rather listen as opposed to read, that's available as well.
That's
and
nice.
My author site is Jim Mosquera. That's JIMMOSQUERA.com.
Well, folks, listen. You got to go check out some of what Jim shared, particularly in his books, because you can dive into it, and he's provided plenty of it for you to continue this conversation with him in his books, or go visit him on his website and reach out and say something to him. Well, Jim, thank you again for joining me. It's been a lot of fun to co-create with you today in this space, and I just want to acknowledge you again as an unbiased voice for people to become better aware of the world that surrounds, and helping people just to improve how they approach their life and their own personal finances. So thanks again so much.
Dave, it's been great being on with you today.
Absolutely. Well, I want to, of course, thank the listeners as well. Until next time, be bold, stay true, and unveil your creative superpowers.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.
I get up and I show